Being able to make impacts at further distances has been something I've wanted to do for a very long time. Not making these 5 mistakes that we're going to cover today will make your day at the range so much better. All of these things can be easily identified and solved at your local range at 100 yards and in. That way, on your first trip out, you can hear that sweet sound of ringing steel out at distance. Wait for it. Just a couple weeks ago, myself and a coworker took a long-range class that had targets all the way out to a mile. Out of our class of 8 guys, everyone was able to make hits on 12-inch steel plates all the way out to 1,000 yards, relatively easily. But before we could get there, our instructor had to spend 2 hours fixing these 5 problems across the group before we could get started. Unfortunately, some folks think that being able to reach out to 1,000 yards is a difficult task and requires all kinds of special equipment, and this can hold some people back, probably myself included. Most folks in this class were just using factory off-the-shelf offerings. The true requirements of the class were a platform capable of 1 MOA, not a quarter, not a half, just 1 MOA, and so many factory offerings these days are capable of that. The second is an optic that has turrets to dial windage and elevation. There is one caveat to this that we'll cover in our 4th item today. We also needed 100 rounds for the class. Now, I used my reloads. I know, huge shocker. But I believe that 5 of the 8 guys were using some sort of a factory offering, and were still able to be plenty successful. The other thing you're going to need is a bipod or some type of sandbag. If you don't know your target's distance, you might need something like a rangefinder. But if you know your distances, this was all you really needed to be successful. The first problem to discuss today is gear-related. Most everyone was using some type of a bipod. However, supporting the rear is just as important as the front. Choose whatever system that you prefer, but having a rear support bag of some type should be considered a requirement for engaging targets at multiple distances. Pretty much everyone in the class ended up using a tab gear rear bag since the instructor had these available, but I will link some sort of a Coltac product in the description box below that's very similar. But having a rear support system is just as important as the front if you want to reliably hit your target and spot your impacts in case you miss. Don't worry though, I know that you never miss, but that guy, yeah, he misses. The second item is also kind of gear related, but to be fair, it was not on the list. But something I see these days is people not having a level. If your system isn't level, this will not only show up at long range, but also affect your group slightly at short range. You can spend as little or as much on this as you want. However, having a cheap one over not having one at all is a giant improvement. The Vortex has one that's reasonable for around $34, but having one is the first step to success. Making sure your system is level when you break the shot is one of the biggest differences in getting an impact, or trying to determine why you missed. But like I said before, I know, you never miss. That's fine. The third mistake that was uncovered is not having your level set up correctly. So if you have one, you still need to level it with your turrets. It's a very important step that some folks missed. There are a ton of videos out there on scope mounting, so go choose whatever one you like. To get close, Arasaka makes this tool, and if your scope base is level with your turrets, you're going to be good to go. You can argue that the scope doesn't necessarily need to be level with your scope base, though I would certainly recommend setting it up this way. But what is absolutely mandatory is that your leveling system is level with your scope reticle. You need to validate this if you want to be successful. When you're dialing your solution for distance, the only thing you want to be dialing is elevation, not a combination of elevation and windage. This can easily be done by taking a carpenter's level and making a line out at distance, or probably even better with a plumb bob if you're not dealing with a ton of wind that day. Plumb bobs are not complicated. In fact, I just used a chalk box you can find on Amazon for like $8 because I already had one, and suspended from a plastic sawhorse in my backyard. I'm going to link a video at the end of the video that explains exactly what you need to do at 100 yards to make sure that you have this set up correctly. Having this set up ahead of time is going to increase your success rate a ton. The fourth issue that was found at initial sighting was the scope that one gentleman had brought did not have enough dial and elevation for the solution that was needed to connect at the targeted distance. Nothing is more disappointing than having an equipment limitation that could have easily been identified at 100 yards, preventing you from success. After zeroing at 100, everyone reset their turrets to read 0, so you can easily dial up and down to engage targets at the various distances available. You can set up your 0 stop here if your scope is equipped with one, but after resetting the turrets, simply dial your elevation to its max and see what remains. The scope this gentleman chose only had 19 mils of total elevation adjustment in the scope itself. After it was mounted and zeroed, unfortunately he only had 6 mils of elevation left to dial after zeroing it. How would we have known this ahead of time? Simply zeroing the rifle, resetting the turret, and seeing what the limitation was. You don't know what your elevation dial is going to be? There are tons of free ballistic calculators out there, and they should get you close. I was using Hornady's 140 grain ELDM, so I used the Hornady Fordhoff calculator, and my elevation dial needed to impact at 1,000 yards was around 8.3 mils, or 28.5 MOA, whichever you prefer. And if I wanted to go out for the mile, my solution needed to be around 25 mils. For this gentleman only having 6 mils, he had a couple choices. He could switch his scope, possibly change his scope base to add one that had elevation built in. Rails are typically available in different MOA cants, so adding some more elevation with your rail is always a possibility if you don't want to invest in a new scope. There are multiple solutions to this problem, but identifying it ahead of time is the biggest issue. The setup I was using, I had 16.4 mils of dial left after I had zeroed, but I also had additional 10 mils available in my reticle. This allowed me enough elevation adjustment to attempt everything that was available all the way out to the 1 mile target. The fifth mistake that showed up on our training day was ammo related. Now the class required 100 rounds for the day, but one gentleman did have 100 rounds, but he brought a mixture of different loads and projectiles. Well, I would certainly recommend trying different loads to see what your rifle prefers. You need to realize that when you change your load, you're also likely changing your zero somewhat, as well as your drop table. Mixing multiple brands of ammo is just going to make your day at the range more challenging, at least if you're trying to get out to those further distances. Once you feel you have all these things corrected and ready to go, I really suggest that you run a tall target test to validate your system before you drive hours to find that long-range distance to challenge your skill. Brian Litz of Applied Ballistics has a great video showing you exactly how to do this to prove to yourself that you're ready to go. You can check that video out right here, and in the words of 8541 Tactical, get out and shoot.